Hello, my name's Joe Brewer, and I'm the co-founder of the Design School for Regenerating Earth and also a member of the founding team for Fundación Barichara Regenerativa. Today, I want to share with you the story of how we're helping to create a bioregional funding ecosystem in the northern Andes based in Colombia. Now, this is work that, for my part, begins in the town of Barichara in the northern Andes, which you can see depicted here. And Barichara is in the great turn of the northern Andes, where three tectonic plates come together and cause the Andes mountain range to divide into three parallel ridgelines. And it's in this region that Barichara is situated. And I start this story here because this is the place that I have been working with local leadership to weave regenerative processes at the bioregional scale and building patterns of governance and funding throughout the last 5 years. To get a feel for Barichara, it's helpful to think about it in this way. This is a small town of about 6,000 people located in a unique ecosystem where there's a very complex pattern of mountain ranges and a well-defined regional climate system. What you can see here is that there's a mountain range to the west of Barichara that has a really high ridgeline, causing a rain shadow effect, meaning that the air that brings moisture rises up the mountain, causes clouds to form, and then causes rain, which falls into a cloud forest. And then the moisture or the air that continues is dry as it descends on the other side. So all of the moisture that comes into the territory must come from the southwest. And this creates a scale of regeneration of about 500,000 hectares in size, where we're engaging in a process to reverse the desertification of the region, as we'll talk about in a moment. In this graphic, you can see the plateau that the town of Barichara is located on, which is located right here. And what I want you to notice is how scarred and eroded the landscape is. So this is the place on Earth that has the only high Andes tropical dry forest, which has to do with that cloud forest to the west in the graphic I previously showed, causing there to be a connection for the migratory patterns of birds, where you end up with this unique mixture of cloud forest plants together with desert and semi-arid cactus and desert plants together with tropical rainforest, making a very unique ecosystem like no other on Earth. In this place, 8 out of 10 species exist nowhere else. They're endemic to this place. And in the last 80 years, more than 95% of this native tropical dry forest has been cut down to grow monoculture crops. And so as a result, it's in the process of becoming a desert. And I'll show you some photos in a moment of the scarred landscape. So this is a place that is the home to the indigenous Guane people who have lived here for thousands of years and who were largely destroyed culturally by the conquistadors as they came into this area. But back in the 1990s, more recently, the country of Colombia designated Barichara as a national monument to be able to preserve and promote the incredible local craft skills of this place, meaning that this is a place that is very well suited to create a living laboratory and a prototype for a regenerative economy that can restore the landscape and the ecosystems around it. To give you a feel for how degraded the land is, this is an aerial photo that I took with my drone last year, and you can see what happened after cutting down the forest. This is a region with clay soil, and after the forest was cut down on the steep slopes of the region, the rainfall causes massive erosion as the mud and clay are washed away, which intensifies the process of becoming a desert and accelerates it with each passing rainfall. And you can really see that in this graphic from another photograph I took with my drone last year. So you can see that the rainfall causes deep channels to be carved in the mud and clay during rain events, causing massive erosion. And if you were to go to the Barichara River with a drainage of 40,000 hectares that drains down through the town of Barichara, this is what you would see. This is a photograph that I took last week, and what you'll notice is that there's very little water in the river, and the water that's there is filled with sewage because the town of Barichara dumps all of its black water, the water from the toilets and showers, directly into the river without filtering any of it. So this is a place that needs serious restoration culturally, economically, and obviously ecologically as well. What I want to do now is paint for you briefly the picture of the last 5 years of work in creating a bioregional funding ecosystem in the Northern Andes connected to our work in Barichara. So it all began when I did a crowdfunding campaign and raised $50,000 to create the Barichara Regeneration Fund, and part of this was to purchase a piece of land that became the Origen del Agua Nature Reserve. So we had $35,000 that went to the purchase of this 3-hectare piece of heavily eroded and degraded land to begin an ecological restoration process. But the remaining $15,000 was used to gather representatives of local regenerative initiatives and projects and ask them to set up a governance structure for how to invest the money in these local patterns, these local regenerative efforts, which led to flowing of resources into a tapestry of initiatives where projects that had already been underway before this fundraising was done, what we did was we gathered and determined that the money should go to projects that are already unfolding, that have come to some kind of a bottleneck, and that a small amount of money would help move them forward, while organizing them around the territorial patterns of watershed restoration, ecological corridors, the restoration of soils and native forest, so that we could organize around a territorial pattern of regeneration. As we started doing this work, we were invited into a process of learning about community foundation models, a model of local community governance and community philanthropy. And we began a process that throughout the following 3 years led to the creation of Fundación Barichara Regenerativa, which is the territorial foundation in our territory. And we mobilized funding in multiple stages to acquire land that was brought into the commons, to fund a variety of regenerative efforts, and to begin organizing at the territorial scale. This led us to discover that we should really focus our efforts into thematic areas that could be organized into their own funding structures, their own portfolios of projects. And we discovered that we could organize this work into 4 major categories: regenerative education, regenerative economy, ecological restoration, and territorial healing. But as we were doing all of this work, there was a movement of territorial foundations in Colombia, which is where we learned about this model and got involved in that movement. And that led to the creation of a backbone organization, an organization that provides support to the network of locations creating this model of foundation, an organization called Territoria that's based in Bogota. And last year at our national gathering in Colombia for all of the territories working to create one of these models of foundation, I suggested that we create a Northern Andes Regeneration Fund, and representatives from 8 different territories decided that they would like to participate in this. And then we raised $150,000 to begin designing this fund and mobilizing funding into a network of territories, inspired by the model of bioregional regeneration of Fundación Barichara Regenerativa in our own local territory. So to give you a feel for how this happened in Barichara itself, we have been working since 2020 to create a bioregional learning ecosystem where we identified regenerative projects and processes that were happening in our territory. We mapped them to the landscape, as you can see here, and we looked for the underlying dynamics or processes that would lead to regeneration of our territory to be able to support them moving forward, so that the work of our territorial foundation could focus on weaving and continuing these processes up to the territorial scale. So how it worked was like this. With Barichara Regenerativa, we recognized that an entire bioregion can only be regenerated through an approach that takes the whole system into account. So our approach was to identify patterns of regenerative work that flow across a tapestry of local projects. We began mobilizing resources among those projects and processes, as well as from outside funding sources. And we began to create pathways toward the integration of otherwise isolated efforts. And the Territorial Foundation helped us to do this. So this meant that we would gather key stakeholders in different thematic areas who are holding important processes of regeneration in our territory and support them to work together in service to the bioregion as a whole. And as we did this work, we discovered that while we were working holistically, we needed a way to communicate what we were doing that people could understand and see how they relate to the whole through a focused area, which led us to identifying 5 thematic areas that we work in to organize our work in Barichara Regenerativa. The first is regenerative education. All educational processes related to learning how to live in a healthy way in this place or to regenerate aspects of the territory. Regenerative economy around creating alternative models of economic exchange associated with local producers and local material resourcing and the transformation of local resources into economic value. A focus on ecosystem restoration with priorities around the restoration of watersheds, the restoration of soils, the restoration of forest, and the creation of agroforestry systems. A focus on cultural regeneration, helping us to bring people into harmony, to build trust, to have collaboration and shared governance. And around territorial healing, because this is a place with a long history of colonial conquest and violence, and a place with intergenerational trauma. And we recognize that Barichara has a large number of peace builders and healers who can help us to organize territorial healing patterns at the bioregional scale. So one of the ways that we started to see our foundation, Barichara Regenerativa, being able to function is through a model that is common for community and territorial foundations, which is the model of a community fund. And so we started to see that we could give shape to how we understand the territorial foundation by creating 4 different funding structures. And so we started by working to create a regenerative education fund, which means that we gathered stakeholders from different processes and projects in our territory related to regenerative education and brought them into collaboration with each other to create shared budgets, collaborative agendas, and to create synergies among them. We also began setting up a Restore the Rivers Fund, where we would identify different key processes that would help us to organize the regenerative work that's already happening in our territory around the watersheds and the restoration of our waterways. And we also realized we should create a regenerative economy fund that's focused on the transformation of local resources, the creation of community currencies, and other exchange models that would create a local living economy in our territory. And then a cultural healing fund that focuses on cultural trauma, arts and theater, hosting dialogues in the territory about important matters, and supporting the healing of our relationships to each other and to this place. But then we had these 5 thematic areas that we had named before. So what we saw was that you could actually create a flow for how all 5 of these themes go across each of the funds to maintain a holistic understanding. What this means in practical terms is that Barichara Regenerativa specializes in building collective knowledge about our territory as a whole, inviting and convening focused conversations in different thematic areas, and organizing the collaboration that is needed for this holistic work to occur by connecting the 5 thematic areas to the different community funds that we manage as we set them up and as they coordinate actions in our territory. Now, this model was so powerful that we felt we needed to develop it further and then bring it to the other territories as we move to the Northern Andes scale, something I'll get to in a moment. But first, let's look at how this works with the Regenerative Education Fund, because this is the basic template that we're replicating in the other funds as well. So you can think of it like this. Imagine that there are multiple regenerative education projects, and in this case, you don't even need to worry about what they are. Just recognize that there's a diversity of them. And if we bring them together, then we can actually try to raise funding for all of them to work together to meet each of their individual needs and to create synergies among them. And this is something we did last year as we raised money for our education fund to support the work that's happening in 2025, something that we were successful at doing. But as we built this basic pattern of relationships, we could easily add other regenerative education projects into this portfolio and expand our efforts. And this is how we're building a learning ecosystem with multiple sites and regenerative initiatives spread across our territory. To give you a visual depiction of this, think of it in this way. Each of the sites that you see in this map is somewhere in our territory, but is part of the education work for teaching regenerative education to children. So for example, Totumo, down in the bottom left, has been an alternative school for the last 8 years, and it was purchased and brought into the education fund last year to transform it into a healing and learning center in the future. Whereas the Maloca in the upper right is the current home of a regenerative school for children called Sueños del Bosque. In the top center, Origen del Agua, is a site that we're engaging in land-based restoration practices in a heavily degraded piece of land, but also is right next to a campesino or country school, so there's a regenerative education curriculum being developed associated with it. And the Bioparque and Las Ruinas in the center are places where community forest and reforestation are taking place, and where we're beginning to bring the land called Las Ruinas into a framework of community learning for an ecosystem restoration focus of education in the territory. And so when you look at something like this, you can see that what matters is the relationships among the site-based efforts and the kinds of learning processes that can flow across them, all of which is supported by the Regenerative Education Fund. To make this a little bit more concrete, here's what El Totumo looks like. This is a country-based rural learning center that is going to be able to support community activities and education as we regenerate the territory in one of the more impoverished regions of our area. And here is Las Ruinas, the ruins, where you can see that there's an abandoned house made of mud that is now being explored as the potential home of a regenerative school for children called Sueños del Bosque. And here's a photograph I took last week of children from Sueños del Bosque coming together to explore this space and to talk with the teachers of the school about how we can dream about this becoming a future learning center for the children that's right next to the much larger Bioparque Moncora. This is the larger image of the community forest. In these square and triangular sections of land is a 6-hectare piece of land called Bioparque Moncora that has been in a process of reforestation since 2009. And down here is Las Ruinas at the entrance to this land, which means that we can create a learning center connected to a much larger community forest. And in this way, it's the relationship between the sites and the learning processes that is supported by the Education Fund. And when you look at Origen del Agua, this is a photo in 2021 when we were just starting the restoration work. And you can see it's a heavily eroded and degraded piece of land, and the buildings in the bottom of the image are a rural campesino school where curriculum has been developed and continues to expand to teach the children of the territory how to restore the land at Origen del Agua as part of our larger effort to restore watersheds. Now, what this shows you is that the Regenerative Education Fund is a model of multiple sites and multiple processes organized around bioregional regeneration, just like the other funds of Barichara Regenerativa. But what's interesting about this is that we're part of a larger movement of territorial foundations that are currently active in 8 territories spread across Colombia. And we are organizing the Northern Andes regeneration funding ecosystem around the patterns of organizing for the regeneration of a territory that are being prototyped and applied in practice in Barichara. And the local organizing teams in the 7 other territories are excited by the way that we're organizing bioregionally and the way that we're organizing around regeneration. And so they're taking inspiration from our work about how to create their own funding ecosystems for the regeneration of their own territories. So what's powerful about this is that Colombia is already organized bioregionally. And what I mean by this is that the political units called departments, which would be Colombia's equivalent of a province or a state, are already organized around the watersheds of the different territories of the northern Andes, as you can see in this image on the right. And as you can see, the major hydrological systems, the watersheds of Colombia on the left. Because Colombia's political organization is already structured to be consistent with the way that water flows out of the Andes, we can help organize each territory around bioregional regeneration across a network of territorial foundations, which is exactly what is occurring. When you go out to the larger scale, you'll see that continents are already organized as watersheds, and South America is no exception. So as we are organizing with the territories of Colombia in the same way, we can bring these patterns of regeneration about education, economy, ecosystem restoration, land use change, cultural healing, decolonization, and so forth, to be able to build the patterns of bioregional regeneration across a network of territories throughout the northern Andes. And this brings us to the conclusion of this short introduction to the Northern Andes Regeneration Fund, where I want to share with you that the best strategy for creating transformational change is to have a story that works, which means you have to have a story that people believe in and they're inspired by, and that if they imitate or live out the story, that it actually leads to their success. So the Earth Regeneration Fund, which is the planetary network of bioregional funding ecosystems that we're building, and the Northern Andes Regeneration Fund is part of it, it will be successful if it becomes an environment that generates new stories of bioregional regeneration all over the world. And I hope that this video inspires you to build a bioregional funding ecosystem where you live. Also, if you would like to support the work that is taking place in Colombia, then you can find links below in the description to make a donation or to get involved. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope you'll help me as we come together to regenerate the Earth. Onward, fellow humans.